Susan stirred the gravy slowly, her other hand steadying the pot on the old stovetop that hissed with steam. Her kitchen was small, barely enough space for the table pressed against the wall, but tonight it felt full of scents: rosemary and sage, garlic blooming in melted butter, cinnamon from the pie cooling on the windowsill. Full of color: golden turkey skin peeking through the oven window, burnt orange cloth napkins folded into perfect triangles. It was the first Thanksgiving she had ever hosted. She glanced at the clock. 5:57 p.m. The numbers glowed from the scratched microwave above the counter. Susan wiped her hands on the front of her turkey-printed apron, the one she got from the clearance bin last week, and picked up her phone. No new messages. She unlocked the screen and scrolled through the group chat with her family. Her text was still there, sent the day before. Thanksgiving dinner at my place. Got extra food from work. Would love to see you all. 6 p.m. Susan. Smiley face. She had even added a smiling emoji. Her finger hovered over the message. Not a single read receipt. Not one reply. She closed the screen and tried again. One by one. Mom, Dad, Tyler, Gina. For the umpteenth time that night, Susan pressed her phone to her ear. Ring. Voicemail. Ring. Wasmail. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she lowered the phone to the countertop. The dining table stood proudly in the center of the room, dressed in dollar store sparkle. Pine-scented candles flickered in mismatched holders. Tiny centerpieces with miniature pumpkins and plastic leaves were arranged between trays of steaming mashed potatoes and stuffing. Napkins with cartoon turkeys grinned up from each plate. The pie on the sill was a little cracked, but it smelled divine. She had even hung a little sign over the table, handwritten in gold marker, "Happy Thanksgiving." And not one person had walked through the door. The oven dinged. Susan pulled on her mitts and retrieved the turkey. It was her best one yet, the skin golden, the meat juicy and steaming. She set it carefully on the counter and spooned the cranberry sauce into the crystal dish she'd found at a thrift store. She looked around at all she'd done, all the warmth and effort, all the hope. She whispered into the silence, "Maybe they're just running rate." But the silence didn't agree. It clung to her like cold fog. She forced a little smile and murmured, "Well, at least I won't be hungry." Still, she picked up her phone again and typed another message. "Dinner tonight. I have more food than I can eat. Come by if you can." She hesitated, then hit send. Susan walked into the living room and lowered herself onto the couch. Her back ached. Her legs were sore from standing all day at work. She hadn't even had time to change properly. Her dress, a simple blue wrap she'd found in a donation bin months ago, was still wrinkled beneath her apron. She watched the clock tick. 6:04. She kept glancing at the door, waiting for a knock, a call, a text. 6:31. Nothing. The candles on the table burned lower. 7:15. Her hand trembled as she dialed again. She listened to the ring, then the beep. She hung up. And for the first time that day, her throat burned. They hadn't forgotten. They had chosen not to come. Susan grabbed her coat from the hook beside the door, fingers stiff from the chill. She slipped on her boots, zipped halfway, and clutched her keys. The turkey smell still lingered in her apartment as she stepped into the November night. The cold slapped her face, sharp and immediate. Her breath puffed in clouds as she hurried to her car. The moment her hands met the steering wheel, she flinched. The plastic was icy to the touch. She sat for a second, exhaling slowly, trying to push down the disappointment that curdled in her stomach. Maybe something happened. Maybe they were sick or out running late errands. She turned the key in the ignition, and the engine hummed reluctantly to life. Her headlights cut through the fog and frost, lighting the empty streets lined with dead leaves and melting patches of snow. Pale streetlights flickered above her, casting long shadows over cracked sidewalks. Susan knew the way to her parents' house by heart, but tonight, the drive felt longer. The silence inside the car was too thick, too loud. She didn't bother turning on the radio. As she turned onto the familiar street, her pulse quickened. But the house was dark. No porch light, no silhouettes in the windows, no cars in the driveway. Not even a single holiday wreath or string of lights, which my mom normally insisted on hanging by the week before Thanksgiving. Her chest tightened. She sat there for a minute, staring at the quiet house like it might blink awake, but it didn't. Her heart sank lower with each passing second. Then another thought struck her. Tyler. Her brother Tyler, successful in the tech industry, never hosted holidays. He always cited work, travel, or plain disinterest as his reasons. But it was the only other place that made sense. Susan put the car in drive. When she turned onto Tyler's street, she knew instantly. The driveway was full. Her parents' SUV sat near the end, unmistakable in its dented bumper. Tyler's Audi was pulled in just enough to make room. Inside, the house was glowing. Through the bay windows, I saw movement, shadows of people moving around a long dining table. Golden light flooded the windows, warm, inviting. Music floated faintly from within, something jazzy and soft. Her hands curled around the wheel. She didn't turn the car off immediately. She just sat there, numb. So they hadn't forgotten. They hadn't fallen ill or lost power or been too tired. They had made other plans without her. Susan stared at the front door. The laughter reached her next. It was muffled by glass and insulation, but she could still hear the rhythm of joy. Her mother's distinct cackle, Gina's high-pitched squeal, even Tyler's low, casual laugh. She turned off the ignition, then got out. The cold didn't sting anymore. She walked to the door slowly, each step weighted with dread. Her boots made little sound on the smooth concrete. She paused before the wooden front doors. They had a decorative wreath on them. Autumn leaves, glittering ribbons. She raised her hand and knocked. Just once. The door opened quickly. Tyler stood there, a wine glass in one hand. He blinked. No smile, no widened eyes, no apology. "Hey, Susan," he said. His tone was bored. "Since you're here, might as well join us." He turned away without waiting for her to answer. No guilt, just a shrug, and the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. Susan stepped inside, her boots clicking faintly against cool marble tile. The grand entryway smelled faintly of lemon polish and rich candle wax. A chandelier glittered above her like ice. The hallway was quiet except for the gentle hum of music and distant laughter. She followed Tyler without a word, past a sweeping staircase that curved elegantly to the second floor, past tall vases filled with dried stalks and autumn arrangements. The warm scent of turkey, sage stuffing, and honeyed ham rushed at her, wrapping around her like a memory she hadn't been invited to relive. They reached the dining room. It glowed like something out of a catalog. The walls were bathed in golden light from recessed fixtures above. The table, long and gleaming with lacquered wood, was dressed in an elegant cream runner lined with gold trim. Steam rose from platters of roasted turkey, glazed ham, candied yams, and green beans glistening with butter and almonds. Baskets of warm rolls sat beside crystal bowls of cranberry relish and deviled eggs. Fine china rested on linen napkins folded into fans. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the chandelier. It was the kind of meal people posted about, celebrated, remembered. Susan stood at the entrance, feeling like an intruder. Her mother sat at the head of the table, a glass of red wine in hand. She didn't even glance up at first. Gina, the straight-A honor roll student and soon-to-be valedictorian, sat to her right, slowly twirling her fork through mashed potatoes, eyes fixed on her plate. Her father reclined sedately in his chair, sipping something dark from a heavy glass, his gaze fixed distantly toward the far wall. The only one who reacted was Tyler's wife. Her sister-in-law blinked, startled. A fork paused halfway to her mouth. Her wide eyes met Susan's, and guilt flared behind them like a spark. "Susan," she said softly, beginning to rise. Her motion was slow, weighed down by the curve of her pregnant belly. "No, please, sit," Susan said, lifting a hand gently. Her voice was calm, too calm, like she rehearsed this moment in her head but couldn't remember the lines. The room was too warm, the scent of food suddenly cloying. Her mother finally looked up, lips tight with annoyance. "Are you just going to stand there?" Her jaw twitched. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. The words that had formed in the car, in the hallway, they tasted different now. Heavier. Bitter. "I thought maybe something had happened. You ignored my texts, my calls. I thought someone was hurt." Her mother scoffed and sipped her wine. "You always make things about you." The sentence echoed in the room like a bell. No one else looked at her. Not Gina. Not her father. No one else spoke. Susan felt herself slowly detached from the scene, like peeling away from her own shadow. She turned without a word. The echo of her footsteps followed her down the hallway. No one stood up. No one called her name. The door clicked shut behind her. Her mother's laughter resumed before she even reached the driveway. Susan drove home in complete silence. The heater hummed softly, but it did nothing to ease the cold that settled in her chest. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The streets were mostly empty now. Storefronts shuttered for the holiday, the few pedestrians bundled tightly against the chill. Frost lined the edges of her windshield like brittle lace. She didn't cry. She didn't even feel angry. Just hollow. When she pulled into the lot beside her building, her headlights swept across her apartment windows. The string lights she hung still twinkled faintly through the curtains, mocking her. She climbed the steps slowly, her limbs heavier with each step. Her keys jingled too loud in the quiet hallway. As she pushed the door open, warmth greeted her. The scent of rosemary, garlic, and baked sugar still clung to the air. Her table stood exactly as she left it. Perfect, untouched. The candles were puddles of wax. The turkey was cold, its skin now dull and shriveled. The pie sat in silence, no slice taken. Susan dropped her coat on the chair and stood there staring. She walked over to the counter and picked up the foil. One by one, she wrapped the trays and bowls, her hands moving automatically. She packed the stuffing into containers, sealed the cranberry sauce, gently placed the pie into its box. The centerpiece was the last to go. She blew out the final candle and watched the smoke curl up toward the ceiling, vanishing into the dark. She unplugged the string lights. The apartment dimmed as the twinkling lights faded out, shadows creeping across the floor. Finally, she sank on the couch. She didn't bother changing, just pulled the old throw blanket over her shoulders and curled up against the cushions. The faint whir of the refrigerator the only sound. Her eyes stared at the ceiling. Open. Still. A slow ache settled behind her eyes, but the tears never came. Instead, there was a new sensation. Quiet. And inside that quiet, something shifted. Not a scream, not a slam of anger, just a small, irreversible turn of a gear that had long been rusted in place. A single thought rose through the stillness, clear and resolute. Something has to change. Not for them, for her. The first thing Susan did that Monday morning was walk into her manager's office and volunteer for every available shift. Even the doubles, her manager asked.
Especially the doubles, Susan replied. She started arriving before the lights were turned on, stocked shelves, cleaned displays, checked inventory before the store opened. When new hires came in wide-eyed and nervous, Susan was the one who trained them, patient, efficient, unshakable. After a few weeks, she requested a transfer to the shipping department. It was colder back there, quieter, less foot traffic, less need for smiles, just orders, labels, and boxes. Her hands grew faster. Her routine became sharp, deliberate. She packed hundreds of parcels each week with precision and care. She took online business courses after her shifts, learning supply chain management and e-commerce logistics from the quiet glow of her laptop screen. She wrote notes in spiral-bound notebooks and taught herself to budget with ruthless focus. Holidays came and went. Valentine's, Easter, 4th of July. She celebrated none of them. When her coworkers asked if she was doing anything for Christmas, she just shrugged, probably reorganizing the back room. She didn't call home, didn't text. When Gina messaged her once, a simple, "Hey, are you okay?" On a random Sunday morning, Susan saw it, read it, didn't reply. She silenced family group chats, blocked the notifications. It was easier that way. Her phone was quieter than ever. No rings, no vibrations, no requests. And she found that she preferred it. The silence, once suffocating, had become a strange kind of freedom. In that silence, Susan was building something. A life no one would take credit for. A future that didn't need their applause.
It was late afternoon when the man walked in. The sun had dipped low enough to cast honey-colored beams through the storefront windows. Dust floated lazily in the light, and Susan is wiping down a display shelf near the register, grateful for the quiet lull after a long day of shipping and stocking. Then, the bell above the door chimed. She glanced up. Tall, effortless posture, a tailored wool coat in charcoal gray, dark hair combed back with intentional ease. His amber eyes scanned the space sharply, missing nothing. There was something about him that made people instinctively step aside. And yet, here, in this modest retail shop, he looked almost out of place, like someone who had stepped down from a glossy magazine spread and into the mundane. He walked straight to the counter. "I'm looking for something specific," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, touched with the faintest edge of exhaustion. Susan tucked her rag under the counter. "Your colleagues don't seem to understand," he added, glancing briefly over his shoulder toward where two coworkers huddled in the corner, pretending not to notice him. She gave a dry, amused half-smile. "Try me." He described the item in detail, a discontinued, limited edition product, one most employees wouldn't even know existed, let alone where to find it. As he spoke, Susan's mind clicked into motion, cross-referencing storage zones and clearance bins. She nodded once, turned, and headed into the back. The storeroom was cold, a concrete maze of cardboard towers and metal shelves. She walked with certainty, weaving through the narrow aisles until she found what she was looking for, a slim, unmarked box hidden behind a stack of outdated inventory. She returned and laid it gently on the counter. The man looked down at it, then back up at her. A slow, impressed smile spread across his face, dimples, white teeth, the kind of smile that could disarm a room. "You're very good," he said. "I'm thorough," she said. "Do you do one-on-one assistance?" he asked, studying her face. Susan crossed her arms. "If you're paying, I'm helping." He let out a low chuckle, rich and amused. "I like that answer." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a sleek business card. Heavy stock, embossed letters, no company name, just his name and contact information. "See you at noon tomorrow," he said, already turning toward the door. "I didn't agree yet," she called after him. He paused at the door, half smiling. "But you will." Then he was gone. The bell jingled softly behind him, and the air felt changed somehow. Susan looked down at the card in her hand. Damon Rowe. His name was Damon Rowe. In tech and finance circles, the name carried weight. He was the CEO of a venture capital firm that backed some of the biggest startups in the East Coast. A billionaire before his 30th birthday. Featured in Forbes, profiled in Wired. He was the kind of man people admired from a distance, but rarely approached, not because he was unkind, but because he carried an intensity that made people check their reflections before speaking.
To Susan, though, he wasn't a headline. He was a name on a heavy business card, a pair of amber eyes that saw more than most, a deep voice that occasionally dropped into quiet humor. He reached out 2 days after their first meeting. "I need someone to organize my personal workspace, and I don't want someone incompetent," he said over the phone. Susan's lips curved. "So you called me?" "Exactly." What began as a single weekend gig turned into a series of small tasks, then bigger ones. She sorted years of digital chaos: bookmarks, cloud storage, labeled folders. She color-coded calendars, flagged time-sensitive deals, built trackers for international holdings. She took charge of his travel schedule, and when he hesitated to trust anyone with his private collection of rare books and artifacts, she cataloged it all with delicate care. Damon never hovered. He observed. Quietly, respectfully. Lunch breaks turned into informal brainstorming sessions. Conversations stretched past closing hours. Sometimes they didn't even talk about work. He'd ask her about her thoughts on automation, her favorite books, the way she saw failure. And he listened, truly listened. Then came the dinners. Once, after a late meeting, he invited her to dinner at a quiet rooftop restaurant above a luxury hotel. The next time, it was a private chef who cooked for them in a suite. Soon there were jet rides to events in LA, museum galas in Chicago, quiet evenings in Napa vineyards. There was always a formality between them, until it softened. Their banter became playful, their silences comfortable. Then came the afternoon at his penthouse. They stood in front of a glass wall that stretched from floor to ceiling. Beyond it, the Empire State Building blazed to life, a radiant blue beacon shimmering among the sea of glass-clad skyscrapers. Susan placed her hand on the cool glass. "This view," she murmured. "I used to dream of this. Not this exact one, but something like it. A space with light and quiet and a feeling that I made it." Damon stood beside her, his hands tucked into his pockets. "You can have it." Susan froze. "What?" She turned her head slightly. "Live here, work here, be my live-in secretary. Your own room, full benefits. Stay." She stared at him. "That's a little forward, don't you think?" He didn't smile. "Not right away. You want control over your life. I'm offering it. You're good at what you do. You don't get distracted. You work harder than anyone I've ever met, and you deserve better than what you've been given." Susan let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "You're not wrong, but moving in with your boss, that sounds like a bad movie." He finally smiled, just a little. "Only if you let it be. Think about it." She did. That night, long after she returned to her apartment, Susan stood at her window looking out at nothing in particular. Her phone buzzed once with a message from Damon. "The offer still stands." She didn't reply, but she didn't delete it either. She moved in 2 weeks later. There was no dramatic announcement, no moving truck, just a few neatly packed boxes, a suitcase, and Susan's quiet resolve as she crossed the threshold of Damon's penthouse for the first time with a tea of her own. Her room was spacious, minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows and cream-toned walls. Everything was sleek, modern, and still somehow warm. Damon had left it untouched for her to arrange as she pleased. Each morning she rose before the sun. She took calls from the glass balcony wrapped in a knit cardigan, her coffee warm in hand, as the sky transitioned from slate gray to soft gold and city lights blinked awake. She typed memos at the marble kitchen island while classical piano drifted through the speakers. She watched the city come alive below her, the hum of traffic fading beneath the glass. Damon often worked beside her, sometimes silent, sometimes discussing deals aloud as if thinking with her in the room sharpened his focus. The distance between them shortened in inches, then heartbeats. They shared dinners cooked together in the open-concept kitchen. She laughed once when he couldn't dice an onion, and he grinned like a man who hadn't heard laughter in months. The line between assistant and something more blurred with such subtlety that neither of them could mark the exact moment it began. One evening, after a long day of meetings, she walked out onto the balcony just as the spring rain began to fall. The sky was violet with distant thunder. She was barefoot, her hair pulled up, the silk of her blouse catching the breeze. He followed her without a word. She turned to say something, but he kissed her before the words came. She didn't pull away. After that, things shifted, gradually, naturally. She fell asleep next to him more than once, books resting across her chest, her reading glasses slipping from the bridge of her nose. He always pulled a blanket over her. They never labeled what they were. They didn't need to. Then came Venice. It was just after her birthday. Damon had surprised her with a private jet, a secluded villa overlooking the canals, and 3 days of silence broken only by lapping water, gondolas, and each other. On the third morning, he woke her just before sunrise. They walked down to a small dock where the sky melted pink into blue. "I wanted to ask you something here," he said.
Susan blinked, breath fogging the early air.
"Why here?" "Because it's quiet, and it's yours now." He reached into his coat and pulled out a box. Inside, a ring shimmered like morning light. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need to. "Say yes," he said simply. She smiled. "Yes."
The ring was discreet, a flawless diamond in a slender platinum setting, elegant rather than ostentatious. Susan had picked it herself, favoring meaning over size. But the wedding? The wedding was anything but quiet. The ceremony was held in a restored 18th century villa on the Amalfi Coast, perched high above the sea. Every detail had been meticulously planned but looked effortless, from the floating candles that lined the reflecting pools to the string quartet that played under draped wisteria. High society came out in full force. CEOs, fashion icons, international dignitaries. The guest list had its own press embargo. Drones circled from a distance, capturing aerial shots that would later headline tabloids and social media feeds. Susan wore a custom-designed gown, a fluid masterpiece of hand-stitched satin and lace, the train trailing like moonlight across marble floors. Her hair was swept back in soft waves, her makeup glowing and minimal. No tiara, no veil, just her. Damon stood beside her in a sharply tailored midnight suit, one hand holding hers tightly, the other resting protectively against the small of her back. He looked at her like she was the only person in the universe, and in that moment, she believed it. Photographers snapped hundreds of photos. Every major entertainment blog covered the affair within hours. Page 6 ran the headline, "The Secretary Who Stole a Billionaire's Heart." Finance outlets praised Damon's bold personal pivot. Fashion magazines fawned over her dress, her poise, her transformation. A Cinderella story, they called it. Susan didn't care. She didn't marry Damon for the headlines. She married him because, in his eyes, she had never been invisible. To the world, she was a fairy tale, a Cinderella story, the unknown woman who had emerged from nowhere and married one of the most eligible bachelors in the country. To Susan, it was none of that. It was peace. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the polished runway as Susan stepped up the staircase of their private jet. The breeze lifted the silk scarf wrapped around her shoulders. Behind her, staff carried luggage embossed with her new initials. She had just settled into her seat when her phone buzzed. "Janae insists she saw you on TV. I told her that's impossible. Then she sent this picture. Is this you, Susan? Mom." Susan stared at the screen. Attached was a paparazzi photo of her in her wedding gown, smiling beside Damon beneath a curtain of white blossoms. It had gone viral overnight. She said nothing for a moment, just let the hum of the engines and the rustle of luxury surround her. Then she opened her camera, lifted the phone, and snapped a single picture of herself walking up the jet stairs, attendants waiting at the top, her diamond glinting in the light. She typed one word: yes. She hit send and turned her phone off, and leaned back in her seat, smiling faintly as the jet lifted into the sky, destination Bora Bora. 2 weeks later, as autumn gave way to the early hush of winter, Susan sat by the expansive window of the penthouse. The city spread out beneath her in a glittering mosaic. She held her phone loosely, the screen dimmed, her thumb hovering just above it. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind that brought reflection rather than noise. Damon was out at a board meeting. The staff moved silently through the apartment, tending to arrangements for the upcoming holiday. Susan sipped her tea and opened her family group chat for the first time in a year. The last message had been hers, unanswered. She took a breath.
then typed, "Thanksgiving dinner, my place, 6 p.m. Simple. No emojis, no over-explaining. She stared at the message before hitting send. The moment it went through, she locked her phone and set it face down. 10 minutes passed. Then her phone buzzed once. Mom, we'll be there. Then again, Janae, can I bring anything? 3 exclamation points. And finally, Tyler, looking forward to it. Susan stared at the screen. No questions, no confusion, no apologies. But they were coming. She set her phone down again, calmly this time. Her heart didn't pound, she didn't shake. The wind outside howled faintly against the glass, but inside, everything was still. She turned to the housekeeper and said, "We'll need extra place settings this year." Then she smiled, not because she needed them to come, but because she wanted them to see everything. The elevator glided upward in smooth, hushed silence. Susan stood at the top floor, waiting. The catering team was finishing the last touches on the hors d'oeuvres. The dining table shimmered beneath candelabras in polished silver. Soft jazz hummed through the ceiling speakers. Glassware sparkled. Floral arrangements stood tall, and the marble floors gleamed with fresh wax. Susan adjusted the cuff of her silk burgundy gown. It hugged her figure with elegant restraint and shimmered slightly as she moved through the soft light. Her hair was swept up in a classic chignon, simple diamond studs in her ears. Her nails matched the deep tone of her dress. Her posture was poised but relaxed, arms loose at her sides. Then came the soft chime. The elevator doors slid open. Her family stepped in as if entering another world. Her father chose silence, like he always did, but his eyes took everything in. Her mother was the first to react. She froze halfway across the threshold, her mouth falling open. Gina stepped past her, wide-eyed, her gaze darting from the towering ceilings to the panoramic view of the skyline through glass walls that stretched from floor to ceiling. Crystal chandeliers hung like constellations. Gold fixtures gleamed. Sculptures lined the foyer like a private museum. Modern art adorned the walls, framed in black and brass. "This is," Gina whispered, "this is like a movie." Susan stood calmly in the center of the space, hands clasped lightly in front of her. She didn't step forward, didn't rush to greet them. She let the room do the speaking. Tyler stepped out of the elevator last. His jaw tightened as he glanced around. He turned to her. "This is your place?" he asked quietly, almost disbelieving. Susan tilted her chin. "Ours," she said. "Damon and mine." Her voice held no edge, no smugness, just fact. Her mother blinked rapidly, trying to find something to say but finding nothing that fit. Susan turned slightly and gestured down the hall with the elegance of someone accustomed to hosting. "Dinner is this way." And with that, she walked slowly toward the dining room, heels clicking softly on polished stone, the scent of rosemary and wine already floating from the kitchen. They followed, silent, stunned, exactly as she'd imagined. The dining room was a portrait of refined luxury. The Thanksgiving table stretched nearly the full length of the room, a dark walnut masterpiece dressed in a white linen runner embroidered with delicate gold thread. Each place setting gleamed with gold flatware laid atop fine ivory china rimmed in champagne shimmer. Crystal goblets sparkled under the soft glow of pendant lights above. Fresh autumnal floral arrangements dotted the center of the table. Orange calla lilies, white roses, deep burgundy leaves and branches of eucalyptus, arranged artfully between platters of roasted vegetables, duck fat potatoes, and herb-seasoned dressing. The turkey was carved tableside by a white-gloved chef, garnished with sprigs of thyme and blood orange slices, Beside him, a second server placed porcelain dishes filled with pumpkin risotto and candied chestnuts. Other attendants moved discreetly behind the scenes, pouring wine into gleaming glasses and ensuring no plate remained empty for long. Susan took her seat at the head of the table, regal without effort. Her movements were fluid, assured. She didn't need to announce herself. The room did that for her. Tyler sat to her left, his fork untouched. He kept glancing around the space, from the large abstract painting on the wall behind them to the subtle lighting woven into the crown molding. He looked as though he were trying to do the math and couldn't quite balance the equation. Gina sat beside him, jaw slack as she took in the sheer grandeur. Her eyes flicked from the artwork to the hand-polished marble floor to the full staff that moved like quiet shadows. Her mother was rigid in her chair, her face carefully composed, though her hands were fidgeting under the table. She blinked too often, like her mind hadn't yet caught up with her surroundings. Her father sat stiffly across from her, quiet, his normally ruddy complexion pale under the warm light. They weren't used to being speechless, but here, in this room that Susan had built around a life they knew nothing about, they had nothing to say. Then Gina leaned in slightly, her voice low. "You're really married to him?" Susan turned to look at her. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she nodded once. A simple, graceful confirmation. Gina sank back slowly, wide-eyed, her gaze processing. The silence that followed was thick, but Susan didn't fill it. She didn't need to. They were already drowning in what they hadn't seen coming. Dessert arrived with delicate grace, a trio of handcrafted pastries presented on gold-trimmed porcelain, pear tarte tatin, spiced pumpkin mousse, and miniature chocolate soufflés. The scent of cinnamon, caramel, and warm vanilla drifted through the room like a lullaby. Susan set her fork down with quiet precision and stood. The servers paused. She lifted her glass and gave it a small, clear clink with the edge of her spoon. The soft ring echoed beneath the chandelier, drawing every gaze toward her. Her posture was perfect, composed, measured. Her burgundy gown fell around her like still water. "I invited you here tonight," she began, voice steady, "to say one thing." She looked at each of them in turn. Tyler, Gina, her mother, her father. "This is the last holiday we'll spend together." The room stiffened. Her mother scoffed, brows knitting into a sharp frown. "What's that supposed to mean?" Susan met her gaze, unflinching. "Exactly what it sounds like." Her mother leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine with agitation. "You finally get a little money and now you're too good for us." Susan shook her head slowly, her smile soft and mournful. "No, I'm not too good for you, but I finally know what I deserve." She looked at her brother. "I remember calling you after my promotion. I was proud. I wanted to share it with you." She turned to her mother. "And you didn't care." Her mother rolled her eyes. "You went from cleaning up after customers to bagging their orders. Whoop-de-doo." The words fell like a stone in the room. No one laughed, not even Tyler. Damon, silent until now, reached across the table and gently took Susan's hand in his. The gesture was quiet, but grounding. Susan drew in a breath and continued. "You ignored me, always. When I was promoted, you dismissed it. When I hosted Thanksgiving with food I made myself and begged you to come, you left me to eat alone." Her voice never rose. That somehow made the words land even harder. Jenna looked down at her plate. Her father shifted in his seat. Tyler's jaw clenched. Susan tightened her fingers around Damon's. "I didn't invite you here to celebrate with me. I invited you to witness what I became without you." She let the silence stretch. This is the first and last time you'll see my life. The door you closed stayed closed. I just built another one." The chandelier flickered above as the weight of her words settled over the table like dust. No one spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The soft chime of the elevator sounded like the final toll of a bell. Susan stood near the entrance of the penthouse, one hand resting lightly against the polished edge of the open door. Behind her, the echoes of silverware being cleared and soft jazz still lingered in the background. But in this moment, the music felt miles away. Her family stepped into the foyer slowly, the opulence around them now a weight rather than a marvel. Her mother walked ahead with mechanical precision, her expression unreadable. The woman who so often carried her voice like a weapon now said nothing. Her father followed, shoulders stiff, mouth pressed into a tight line. The disbelief on his face hadn't melted. It had hardened, like pride refusing to admit its own miscalculation. Tyler was the third to move. He paused briefly before the threshold, hands deep in his pockets. He looked like he wanted to say something, but instead he gave a half glance in Susan's direction, then looked away. His feet moved forward, carrying him out of the space like he was trying not to look back at a mirror. Then came Jenna. She lingered at the edge of the elevator, eyes glossy, her steps reluctant. She turned back to face Susan, her gaze searching. "I didn't know," Jenna whispered. Susan met her eyes. There was no anger in her expression, no triumph, just clarity. She gave Jenna a small nod, soft, gentle. Not an invitation, but not a farewell either. Maybe, Susan thought, when Jenna is older, when she sees things for herself, when she steps out under their shadows. For now, it was enough. Jenna stepped inside. The elevator doors began to glide shut. Susan remained still, her hands clasped calmly in front of her, watching until the very last sliver of gold light disappeared. And then the doors closed. With them, so did the past. That night, the penthouse was quiet again. The dining room had been cleared, the wine glasses washed and stored. The flicker of candles had been replaced by the soft glow of recessed lighting above the city skyline. Susan curled beside Damon on the wide linen sofa, her legs tucked under her, a thick cashmere throw draped over both of them. The air outside the floor-to-ceiling windows shimmered with lights, New York alive and endless beyond the glass. Damon rested his arm around her, thumb brushing slow circles over her shoulder. "Did it feel good?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. Susan didn't answer immediately. She stared out at the skyline, the sweep of golden windows, blinking towers, the faint ripple of lights from Central Park below. She thought, not about the anger, not even the pain, but about the girl who once stood in her tiny apartment, wrapped in silence, wondering what she did wrong, and the woman she had become. Her voice was quiet but sure when it came. It didn't feel good. She turned to him. It felt fair. Damon leaned in and kissed her shoulder, soft and grounding. "They don't deserve you," he said simply. She exhaled slowly and rested her head against his chest. His heartbeat was steady beneath her cheek. Her eyes flicked once more to the skyline, then fluttered closed. "Finally," she whispered, "I am not invisible." The words didn't carry bitterness. They weren't meant for her family. They were a declaration, a truth. For the first time in her life, she didn't need their love. She had her own. Susan closed her eyes, wrapped in warmth and quiet. Finally seen, finally chosen, finally free.